Well, good afternoon, everyone who's joined us for the Business Gateway webinar, Back to Business, What We Know So Far. I'm Hugh LightBody, I'm the Chief Officer for the Business Gateway National Unit, and we're going to wait a few moments just to give folks a chance to join the call and join the webinar this afternoon. We have over 350 people who've registered, and we're just counting the numbers as they come in. We're approaching 200 at the moment. So if you don't mind, we're going to give folks a few moments, because there's a wee form they need to fill in, obviously, as they come in, as you will have done. So we'll give them a moment to get themselves included. That's us just hit 200, which is great news. As I say, I'm Hugh LightBody, Chief Officer, Business Gateway National Unit. I'm joined today with colleagues from Federation of Small Businesses and Highlands Enterprise. So, Susan, would you like to just kind of introduce yourself and to tell us a wee something about Federation of Small Businesses?
Sure thing. Thanks very much for having us on today, Hugh. So my name's Susan Love. I'm the Policy Manager for FSB Scotland. For those of you who are not familiar, the Federation of Small Businesses is a membership organisation for small businesses and the self-employed. What are we here to do? We provide you with services and advice to help you as a business owner reach your ambitions. But we're also here to fight your corner, essentially. So my job in particular is to be an advocate for small business, to try and give small businesses a powerful voice in government.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself, say a few words about Highlands and Islands Enterprise?
Yes, thanks, Hugh. My name is Stephen Hutcheon. I'm Head of Technology and Innovation with Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We're one of 3 enterprise agencies in Scotland. There's Scottish Enterprise as well, and now there's the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency. And our remit is to help businesses and community groups grow. Our vision is around creating a highly successful, inclusive, prosperous region that people choose to live, work and invest in. And that remains the same, albeit now we've very much swung to focus on the COVID-19 situation. The team I'm responsible for, we deliver a number of different schemes around innovation, so the Northern Innovation Hub, our Innovate Your Business programme, Co-Innovate, and we also deliver our digital and technical support. More widely, HI provides advice, funding, loans to businesses and community groups to grow in the Highland area.
Okay, grand. Thanks for that, Stephen. Just to say a few words about the Business Gateway National Unit, that, as I say, I'm the Chief Officer for. We support local government in the delivery of the Business Gateway service, which is delivered the length and breadth of Scotland. And what we're there to do, as I say, is to support the boys and girls on the ground who are actually doing the hard work and making it happen. So we've been just introducing ourselves there for folks that are just joining us, because we are expecting 350 folks to join the call. We're currently sitting at 246, and it's slightly crawling up there, but I think what we'll do is press on, because obviously we've got a lot to cover this afternoon, so we'll press on with that. We're going to record the session and we'll make it available to folks afterwards. We've also placed all attendees on mute to limit background noise. We have asked in advance for questions from people. We've received a number of questions. We'll try and get through as many of those this afternoon as we possibly can. But as we go along, you may think of another question, or you may have not had the chance to do that yet. So please feel free to put a question into the chat function. I'm not guaranteeing that we will get to it, but what we will do afterwards is review those questions, and we will look at producing and posting responses to those once we kind of got them together in themes. We're going to share what you do provide us with in terms of questions with colleagues in Scottish Government, because it's important that they get the feedback that you're providing of the issues that you're facing. And we will do a wee feedback survey later on what you thought of this webinar, because this is the first time we've done this kind of panel approach. Obviously, Business Gateway, Federation of Small Businesses, Highlands Islands Enterprise, and our colleagues, we've all changed how we do things. We are using webinars for our kind of workshop approach and our Digital Boost program, certainly at Business Gateway. But this is the first time we've done it as a kind of panel approach. So we'll be interested to hear what you think about it. So to set the context, given obviously that our topic this afternoon is back to business, what we know so far, I wanted to share with you, first of all, some findings we got yesterday from a survey work that we've been doing. And obviously, we're doing surveys, FSB are doing surveys, and other organisations are doing that. And I guess we need to apologise for the number of surveys that we're doing. But we're kind of like the doctor, you know, unless you tell us what hurts and where it hurts, we can't really help you. So the point of the surveys is to try and find out what's going on. So it's interesting in the context of this back to business that the two most popular topics that the folks responding to our recent survey have said they'd like more guidance on is finding new customers and making your workplace safe. And these are important topics in terms of how do we get businesses restarted. And I suppose good point here to come to Susan and say, Susan, obviously you touched on there on what the FSB does. Really important organisation, lots of members in Scotland, you're providing lots of great services, but you're also surveying the members, you're talking to people through your branch offices. What kind of things are you finding out? What's the pulse of the business community?
So I'll come on to talk about survey results just in a wee second, but I think before that, I think we all know the completely devastating impact this crisis has had on small businesses across Scotland. We know that from the hundreds and hundreds of emails and calls, worried phone calls that our team have dealt with over the last 10 weeks. So we're going to talk about some numbers, but you know, we're well aware of the human impact that this crisis has had on small business owners and all of the people that work in those businesses. So over and above that, all of that evidence gathered from contact with us, we've also did a big survey towards the end of April that covered about 800 small businesses across Scotland. And that was just looking at that stage, what were the sort of main impacts that we were seeing from small business. So what that showed us was at that point, just over half of all of those businesses in Scotland had closed. And whilst the majority do plan to reopen, of that half that had closed, just over a third were genuinely worried about whether they would be able to reopen again. So real serious anxiety from business owners about what happens next. Of that group, about 70% have furloughed some of their staff, and a fifth told us that they are really struggling to deal with mortgage or rent payments. And similarly, 1 in 10 small business owners have had to apply for universal credit because of the income challenges that this crisis has created. Now, over and above those statistics, we also know from what the banks have told us that there's a significant amount of debt has been taken on by SMEs in Scotland over the last few weeks. So by our reckoning, just on the figures that the banks have given so far, we're looking at easily well over £1 billion in additional debt taken out by SMEs in Scotland just over the last 10 weeks or so. That's mainly through the CBILS and bounce back loan schemes, which we might talk about later. Over and above that, we know that all the various support schemes that have been put in place, so a range of things from the furlough scheme to various grants to those loans that we spoke about, all of that has really offered lifeline support to thousands and thousands of businesses across Scotland. And we know that while some of those support schemes will start to change, as we move into the next phase of this crisis, there's likely to still be a need for ongoing support, and that'll be our job to make the case to government for the need for that support. And so lastly, just focusing on what we're going to talk about today, the majority of queries that we're getting in at the moment from small businesses are largely about when will my business be able to reopen and what will I need to do. So I know we're going to cover a lot of that in the discussion shortly, but I think it's just worth saying that there is sometimes portrayed as a clamour from all businesses to reopen as soon as possible. But I think it's worth saying that the feedback that we are getting does suggest that a lot of small businesses are being really quite cautious about this because they know that when they do reopen, when they're allowed to reopen and when that happens, they know that things will have to change a little or a lot in terms of how they do business, and that that's going to have consequences for the future direction of their business. So I think at the moment, cautious queries, but eager to know, what do I need to do next?
Okay, that's really good. Thanks for that context, Susan. Stephen, just from a Highlands and Islands enterprise point of view, you have a business panel that you use for research, but I know that your advisors are obviously out there on, not on the ground at the moment, obviously, because we're trying to social distance, but we're virtually talking to clients. What are your guys finding?
So, Hugh, we're finding very much the same sort of thing. You know, there's been a massive impact as small businesses, and through things like the various funds and that we've been involved with. As you say, our advisors have been out talking to, not out, but virtually out talking to the businesses, and we've seen, I think, as the time's gone on, the kind of nature of the inquiries has slightly started to change. So initially it's been very much about the sort of the respond phase and about support and funding and so on. Now it's starting to move more towards the restart phase, and businesses are starting to think about that. What we're seeing is that there's, you know, it's the impact on the sort of the Highlands, particularly the parts that depend more on tourism, has kind of almost been disproportionate because of the business base and so on. But across the piece, it's very much around finding new customers and how do we make the workplace safe. And what we're seeing as well, the inquiries are the same, whether it's a small business or a big business. How do I open up safely? When can I open up? And I know from discussions I've had with the Scottish Government that they're coming under a lot of pressure around that. Interestingly as well, one of the sectors that I cover is the Forestry Sector, and we know from a survey that was done there by Confor that the impact in that sector is you know, it's the same as tourism and so on. Again, a lot of small operators, but as a supply chain, it affects the bigger companies as well. So it's how do you get resilience into the supply chain? And then what we're starting to see as well through our innovation schemes and that is we're starting to see more inquiries come in for support, either to develop new products, to modify existing products, or to look at innovations, so things like sensors or that, to allow businesses to get up and operate safely. So there is that. It's not anything like business as usual. It's going to be business is very much different, but we are starting to see inquiries come in about, so what next? How do we do the next phase?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And obviously we touched on earlier there that the findings from our own research is about that issue of opening safely. You've just touched on that again there, Stephen, that this issue of opening safely, Susan's mentioned it as well. And in fact, one of the questions that we've had is Frank Miller, who's a business owner up in Shetland. He's got a guest house. And what Frank's asked, and what you touched on it as well there, Stephen, what date is the earliest we will be able to open? Now, obviously that is one of those $64,000 questions, Frank, because obviously that is going to be governed by the government's roadmap and their phased approach to opening. So we can't give you an answer to that just now, obviously. What he has also asked though is, will we be allowed to use bedrooms with shared bathrooms? Now, clearly there's a social distancing issue in there. There's a cleaning issue. What are our thoughts on that one? Stephen, can I come to you on that first?
Yeah, Hugh, I mean, the work, you know, you'll have seen some of the guidance that's been delivered or developed around the manufacturing sector, but also retail. And I know now from some of the discussions we've been having and things we've been involved with the Scottish Government, they're developing a template around a risk assessment and a checklist. And although that's targeted at manufacturing at the moment, I would expect that will be relevant just, you know, across any business. HSE have been involved in that, and what the approach that they're taking very much, the government around this, is that it's on a risk-based approach. So every business will be different. The guidance is in some ways is quite high level, but that's to allow the businesses the flexibility to make it right for their particular situation. They're the expert on their premises or on their business situation. And I think, you know, things that they're going to look at there is that risk approach. So physical distancing, cleaning, how do you make it safe? There's the guidance that came out from the Elgin bid around surfaces and so on. And I think what the government are going to look for is the businesses to tell them how they can do it safely, or how they are ensuring that it's safe. Interestingly as well, that the guidance is it is taking a risk-based approach, so it's not size of business. So a smaller business, if it's got higher risks, I think the government will be looking for it to make sure that it's adequately addressing those risks.
Okay. Susan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, what I can do, Hugh, is sort of dive through a bunch of issues here that I think it would be useful for small businesses to think about at the moment. So, as you said, a lot of the questions that we're getting in are specifically around when will my type of business be able to reopen? And I wish that we could give you that date. I know that's what everybody's looking for, and I wish we could give that to you. The best advice I can give at the moment is, as Hugh mentioned, have a look at the route map that the Scottish Government published a few weeks ago. What that does is set out the different phases and which type of businesses will be able to open in those different phases. So the phases are reviewed every 3 weeks by the First Minister. She gives her address, usually on the Thursday. So next Thursday is the next phase review, and certainly the indications that have been coming so far are that if everything goes in the right direction from a health point of view, then next Thursday the First Minister might announce that we move into phase 2. And so under phase 2 there are a range of different types of business activity that are allowed to reopen. So particularly things like outdoor areas for certain types of hospitality. A lot of other business activity, it's phase 3 until that can resume, particularly in certain areas of leisure like gyms, for example. And I think we're going to hear more soon about specific types of tourism business and when they'll be able to reopen. But for the moment, take a look at that route map. Think about the phasing, which takes place every 3 weeks, and that will give you a rough idea of the plan. But of course, it's all dependent on what happens with the health figures and the transmission rate of the virus. So that's a sort of an overview of what you should look out for. In terms of what will you need to do when you're able to reopen, there is a lot to think through, and I know that it can be confusing that there's so much guidance out there. So there's a lot of guidance already published, and there's a lot more to come. Now, we've made the point to the Scottish Government that the smallest businesses in particular will want really straightforward, easy to understand guidance telling you what it is you need to do. But we've also said that we think that small businesses will need a certain amount of support to help them adapt to new ways of working, or to reassure them about what they should do. Now, there is going to be a simple guide coming for smaller businesses in Scotland. So that is being developed, but it might be another week or so before it's actually published. But in the meantime, what I can just do is run through some of the key issues that you should think about as a business, because these are broadly the same regardless of what kind of sector you're in. And even though you don't have a date for when you definitely will be able to reopen, it's really important to stress the importance of planning ahead. So developing a plan and then thinking about how you'll prepare for that, and then implementing it on the point of reopening is really something I'd encourage all businesses to think about doing just now. So there's sort of 4 key parts to this that I would run through if people would just bear with me. So the first thing first is to think about a plan, and your plan will be based on a risk assessment. That'll be your main tool to help you think through all of the different risks that you need to address in your business to adapt to new rules and keep everybody safe. Now, FSB members have access to a template that we've done, but I know that there are a lot more out there as well. So for example, Healthy Working Lives have some on their website. That's healthyworkinglives.scot. So that's a free to use source of advice on health and wellbeing at work for SMEs in Scotland. This will all help you think through the different stages. One of the obvious areas that requires a lot of consideration, and I know it's something that small businesses take really seriously, is thinking about your staff. And there's various things to think about here and support to help you get it right. So again, there will be different support mechanisms to help you think about this. So our members have access to a free legal helpline and a legal hub. But there's advice on healthy working lives, and after this webinar and during it, you'll hear other sources of support that's out there to help you go through this. So some of the issues around staff that you'll want to think about if you've got staff are, once you've done your risk assessment, speaking to your staff about this risk assessment. So what you've found as a result of this, what will change, and thinking about any training that's going to be required with your staff to help you adapt to any new procedures that might be required in the business. Again, thinking about continuing to allow those who can work at home to do so. That's likely to be encouraged by government for certainly at least the first 3 phases of coming out of lockdown. But also thinking about which staff might be particularly vulnerable. So if you have staff that have got underlying health conditions, perhaps those that might be living with people who are shielding or shielding themselves. Again, thinking about how you would minimise the amount of staff in one place at any time, perhaps by staggering start and finish times, changing break times, thinking about transport to work and also in between jobs, as well as thinking about how staff are going to manage childcare challenges if schools, even if when they open in August, they're not back full time. So a whole bunch of issues there to think about in terms of your employees, and there is a lot of advice to take you through all of that. The second sort of obvious issue to consider is putting in place physical distancing measures in and around your business and how you do business, even if you don't have your own premises. So the core of this is thinking about keeping people 2 meters apart, thinking about the flows of people in your premises and trying to identify where there might be pinch points where people come together, like stairs or entrances and exits, for example. Limiting the number of people, so particularly customers, that can come into your premises at any one time, and then thinking about how you would use things like signage and floor markings to manage that, and then how you might change business practice to limit numbers coming in and out, such as doing maybe collection and delivery instead. And also you might think about talking to your customers and making clear to your customers, communicating to them what is changing. So for example, if you decide to change your opening hours, and also introducing things like cashless payment. The third area that I would highlight, I would call hygiene and cleaning. This will obviously be one that you'll hear spoken about a lot. But in terms of reducing the risks of transmission, thinking about scheduling much more regular cleaning in and around your premises, and how you'll make sure that those schedules are kept to will be an important thing for businesses to consider. And I think particularly what will be important here is thinking about things that people touch within your premises. So not just obvious things like thinking about cleaning toilet areas and door handles, but things like pens, tills, computers, thinking about how people will clean their workstations regularly. And obviously, again, every premises is different, but thinking about how you will increase the provision of hand washing and hand sanitizer stations. Now, those 3 areas broadly are the sort of core things that you'll want to think about in your risk assessment, and think about the steps you'll take to address those risks. One final issue that I would just mention, this is a slightly newer issue, so there hasn't been as much discussion about it, but it is worth businesses just thinking about it. This is the test and protect scheme that's now in place to trace people who might have come into contact with people who have COVID. And there are implications for employers and businesses here, so it's worth just thinking about. So there's advice on the Scottish Government website about this now, which will tell you what to do if one of your staff members becomes symptomatic, what you do about testing. But importantly, the process that might happen if one of your employees has been traced as having had contact with someone who has tested positive. And if you're a small business, there might be implications there in terms of the amount of staff who've all had contact with each other and who subsequently have to self-isolate for 14 days. So we've asked for there to be more consideration of the support that businesses might need there, because it's not spoken about a lot, but it is worth thinking about. So as I've said, there's a range of guidance documents available to help you with this. I know it's confusing, especially because there's more guidance coming, but at the heart of it is breaking it down into those simple topics and thinking about what applies to your business. Keep checking all of the sources of support that will be mentioned during the webinar today. If you're an FSB member, obviously you can get access to support from us. We have a lot on our website that's freely available too. And we'll probably have an upcoming webinar on the specifics of this that will be open to any business in Scotland. And lastly, if you're not sure, because the most important thing here is that we all get this right, if you're not sure and you really don't know where to go, pick up the phone to your council, to your local environmental health or trading standards team in your council, because they will be the people that will be coming out for most businesses to keep you right. So it would be easier to phone them and they will put you in touch or give you the right advice that you need for your type of premises.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. So I suppose kind of a summary there in terms of that importance of planning, I guess, is about reassuring your employees that you're safe to operate and reassuring your customers that you're safe to operate as well. So a plan that provides that reassurance to both employees and customers there. You touched on Healthy Working Lives. I know they have assets and resources that they're putting on a specific COVID-19 page. We will provide access to that later on for folks to be able to see that. And I know that that is going to appear on Find Business Support, which is the website, which is essentially a directory of all public sector support that's available. So we'll see that on there in due course, but we will push that out as part of the response to the webinar here. Interestingly, I don't think I heard anybody there talking specifically about PPE, personal protective equipment. And we have a question from Isabel Delgarno, who's a business owner in Pitlochry, and she's just wondering, some businesses such as hairdressing salons require close contact, obviously, cannot therefore follow social distancing. And we touched on social distancing there. When are they going to be allowed to start trading again? And is there a plan in place to allow for small salons to return, one stylist in a small salon to return sooner? Again, the issue there in terms of returning, we don't know, we don't have a date, but I imagine that in that particular circumstance, part of the consideration will be PPE and the appropriate personal protective equipment to support them in coming back. And just while we're thinking about it, the social distancing, we're in 2 meters at the moment. We hear talk of 1 meter. And my understanding is that the difference between 2 meter and 1 meter for example, a restaurant is the difference between running at third capacity and running at something like 70% capacity, and therefore the difference of actually achieving a substantial revenue or a reasonable revenue, one that can make it viable. Any sort of feeling about what might happen on social distancing? Are we likely to see a change, or what's your thoughts on that? And what's your thoughts on the PPE bit as well? Stephen, come to you.
So Hugh, with regard to the social distancing, I haven't seen anything yet from the government that's suggesting that they will reduce it from 2 meters at the moment. I know from the discussions that we've been involved in with the government and where HSE has been there, that they, as we've talked through the sort of the risk assessment and the checklist there with Susan, they see PPE as the kind of as the last thing that that you effectively put in place. So it's putting in all the other things, and then your PPE is your final barrier. So particularly around hairdressing, I would expect PPE will feature in that, because it's just so hard to see how you can't ultimately eliminate that element of contact. So I think in terms of preparing for that, I would be looking at planning. So how do you scheduling of appointments and so on, and trying to do all that stuff. Preparation for that as well. So things like contactless payment and so on. But there's also a really important bit in all of this as well, I think, is around the piloting of it. So because this is new for everybody. So once we get to the stage where it is possible to go back, is piloting it and seeing does it work. And I think it's being sort of sensible around that, and very much working with the Scottish Government, the local authority and so on, and where there are issues or where there are examples of best practice, making sure that you share that widely, because it's about trying to get everybody back and going as quick as we can.
Okay, thanks for that. Susan?
Okay, so firstly on PPE, and I should add here, I don't think any of us are health and safety advisors, so all we're doing here is flagging to you where there's advice and where we think the advice is going to go, okay? But in relation to PPE, the broad advice is that if your business doesn't currently use PPE, so obviously some do, if you don't currently use it, then it's unlikely that you would be expected to use it as part of your new safer working. And so other issues like minimising staff contact time, hand washing and cleaning will be far more important. There will clearly be some exceptions to that, and what are called sort of close contact businesses is an area where there's further advice going to be coming. So I know that the UK government in particular is working on some guidance here, which should be out, I think, in a week or so. And that will cover things like hairdressing, beauty therapy, all kinds of close contact therapy. Also things like tailors, for example, where people have to be close to each other. And there will be some options included there, thinking about, for example, I would think it's likely that might say if you're a hairdresser and you have to have your face close to a client's face, that you would consider some kind of visor would be recommended. But similarly, for certain types of therapy, you will be asked to think about the different risk of different types of treatment. So bluntly speaking, where your face, when a staff member or you as the business owner, where your face comes close to a client's face, so you're within distance of droplets from sneezing or coughing, that is the most high risk. And that's the activity that you'll be asked to minimise as much as possible. So bluntly speaking, a pedicure is going to be less risky than a facial, for example. And so there'll be further advice coming about what specific measures will be required, but at the moment it'll look like some of that most risky activity, you'll be asked to avoid that altogether. In terms of social distancing itself, I know there's a lot of debate at the moment around whether it should be 1 metre, 1.5 metres or 2 metres. I think our job representing businesses at the moment will be to highlight the practical challenges that arise as a result of those restrictions. I mean, we can't make a judgment on the public health guidance, but we will highlight to government the challenges that creates for businesses, particularly hospitality, in terms of the viability of what's possible.
Okay, that's really good. Thank you for that. And I think as well in there, and what we've kind of touched on is the importance of keeping your workforce engaged and informed. And that's going to be an important part of that. We've touched there on healthy working lives as being a particularly good source of information. And as we said earlier, we'll make sure that a link to the really useful resources that they are producing is published and pushed out there. So we'll do that. There might be, I think you touched on it earlier there, Susan, the opportunity or not, as the case may be, for folk to continue to be able to work from home. And as you've said, that certainly seems to be part of the first kind of 3 phases of coming out of lockdown. But that we know has posed a lot of challenges for a lot of businesses. using online platforms as we are doing here with this particular model, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all these kind of things are a way of communicating and staying in touch with employees as much as they are in terms of customers. I know that quite a few of our questions today have been about when can you reopen, and we've kind of touched on, we don't have an answer on that one, but it's interesting in terms of how companies have used technology, in fact, to actually respond to this. And Tracy Griffin was asking, she was asking about when she could open her studio. As I say, Tracy, sorry, we don't have an answer on that. But what she has said there, she's running a small private personal training studio. She's adapted the business to offer webcam workouts. Great, really good idea, Tracy. Obviously, she has a few elderly clients who need to come into the studio, so she was asking about how to adapt the business. We've kind of touched on all those things. It's about that risk assessment and all these kind of things that we've talked about. But it's really great that you're using the technology to try and adapt your business, and that's part of this, as we say, is about using the technology. It's about perhaps trying to do other things in terms of keeping them informed about things like staggering work breaks or staggering transport, because there's an issue with transport, as we know. So maybe staggering start times might be part of responding to that. So what else have we got in there? Is there any sort of things you're picking up, either Stephen or Susan, from your businesses or your businesses you're talking to, your members, in terms of that engagement with your employees and use of technology, these kind of things? Are there issues arising as part of that, Stephen?
So I think with regard to use of technology, one of my colleagues who deals with the creative industry sector, there's a website, Expo North, and there's a lot of good resource on there, and that's looking at how people in the creative side, so musicians and so on, how now that there's there's not gigs at the moment, how do you trade, how do you move your business online? So there's a lot of good stuff there, and we are seeing stuff as well around gyms and personal trainers and that, and moving stuff online. There was a report, I think it was in The Economist, that was saying that COVID-19, they think, has moved technology or update of technology on about 5 years, and so we're starting to see quite a lot of that. And I think, Hugh, businesses, there is that about how do we use forums like this to communicate with people. There's a huge amount of webinars and so on. My own colleagues in the team, we've started doing podcasts and so on, so that people, you don't just have to dial in at a set time, but you can download a podcast and listen. You can gather information that way. So we're seeing things like that. As a team, my team, I've got people from Glasgow right up to Thurso, and from Stornoway right across to Huntly. So, we use a variety of forums. We set up a regular meeting so that we, at least twice a week, we all, talk and so on. Online, we use Skype. But I think one of the important things as well is about how do you keep in touch? How do you get the office banter? How do you get that social element? And so, we've used WhatsApp and set up a group on that, and we just for sort of effectively for non-work stuff, and that keeps everybody connected. And we found that it's brought us maybe closer together in some ways as a team, doing do quizzes and things. So I think I certainly encourage businesses to basically to be creative, to look at different things, to give it a try. Some forum don't work for everybody. Some of your employees might not be comfortable with it and so on, and it's just about trying different things and seeing what works for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And you touched on earlier, Susan, you were talking about the kind of issues that people are wrestling with here, which might be that they have childcare, or maybe they have a vulnerable adult they're looking after, or they themselves are isolating it for one reason or another. And there's, I suppose in there's the folk juggling with that childcare, that homeschooling. I saw something the other day which I thought was incredibly valuable, and it was the Canadian government, in fact, had put an email out to all their staff, and the very first line of that was, "You're not working from home. You're at home during a crisis trying to work." And I thought that was a really kind of interesting way of approaching it, that they were making the point that this is very challenging for everybody. It's a really challenging time. Flexible working therefore becomes even more important to employees as they're trying to do all these kind of things. There's an organisation called Flexibility Works, and they've received government funding at the start of the lockdown, really to help businesses, Scottish businesses, adapt to the situation. So they're offering free webinars on flexible working policy and employee well-being, and that well-being is an incredibly important part of this, because operating in a different way, everything that's happening around us, all the pressures and the stresses that this is causing, there's some serious issues there potentially for folk in terms of their mental well-being. So I think it's incredibly important that people make sure they've got access to resources on that, and there are many resources there to help them on that. So we've got a few things kind of there in terms of, again, that we'll put out. flexibilityworks.org, really useful and supportive information on there for folks. Touched there about on things like furlough, because obviously a lot of folk have perhaps been furloughed. And we had a question from a factory owner in Lanarkshire that produces glassware, hasn't yet put the staff on furlough, but considering doing it. What do they need to do to make that happen? Susan, do you want to sort of pick that one up?
I'd mentioned earlier that so our statistics suggested that about 70% of small businesses had furloughed at least some of their staff. Now, there's been a lot of changes announced to the furlough scheme recently. You'll find more information about all of that through the various sources that have been mentioned. So either the FSB's website, Business Gateway, Find Business Support, or on the gov.uk site. So lots of updates there. But briefly, I think the most recent announcement said that the scheme would continue until October, but there will be changes in terms of the contribution required from the employer. One of the most important changes that we've been calling for that was announced was the introduction of part-time furloughing. And I think that'll be a really crucial measure for a lot of small businesses as they start to reopen, but perhaps not at full capacity. So that'll become possible from the start of July. And two of the hot off the press announcements were that if you haven't already furloughed staff, if you want to do that, then today is the deadline to do that for any staff. So if you haven't done any at all, today is your deadline for furloughing staff. And also, I'd just seen, I think, announced today, there's further announcements for for staff who are on paternity or maternity leave at the moment, and who you might want to furlough when they come back from that leave. So more information available on that. And again, there's more information on our FSB's COVID Hub about that and our legal helpline. If I can just very briefly go back, Hugh, just to the point about mental health, because I think it's worth just stressing this, because I know that it gets lost in a lot of the practical details that small business owners are dealing with here. But as I mentioned at the start, we know the real toll that this has taken on small business owners, the amount of worry that you're dealing with and the amount of things that you're juggling with, and obviously the impact that has on your staff as well. And I think it's just worth taking care of your mental health as a business owner. Again, Healthy Working Lives has support to help you to do that. And the FSB's also got a guide on mental health for small businesses and their staff. So you'll find that on our website, or just Google Small Business and Mental Health Guide and you'll find that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Couldn't emphasise it more. We worked closely, Business Gateway worked closely with Healthy Working Lives during Mental Health Awareness Week to raise these issues. And again, on the Business Gateway website, a lot of resource on there, because it's incredibly important at this time for folks to be looking after not only their employees, but themselves as well. So please access those resources and make sure you're looking after yourself.
Hugh,
Okay,
could
Stephen,
I
do you want to
just
come in? Yeah,
Yeah, so
push
it was
button.
just to interject there as well a little bit about the digital engagement. One of the things that we were finding out from our creative team is very much it's how you use digital to engage with your customers. So, even while you're maybe you're not operating at the moment, it's how do you engage with them for when you come out of lockdown and you start going again, and what are the stories that you're telling and so on. So there's some examples of businesses there that are doing a great job with that, but it's all around telling the story and engaging, and it's just building that pipeline of work for when things
Yep.
do ease again.
Yeah, no, again, really important. And it touches on that other finding, as I say, that we had from our survey yesterday about how does a business get more customers. And again, through our Digital Boost program, we've got a number of webinars out there about selling online, how to talk to your customers, which again is going to be incredibly important in these kind of situations. So there's, again, lots of resources. Marketing, how do you market, how do you change in this new environment, what you're trying to do and how you're getting it in front of people. So again, lots of resources there through Business Gateway, Digital Boost, through Find Business Support and other colleagues in terms of being able to support that and help businesses find more business, which is going to be incredibly important as we go forward.
Can I just add something
Yeah,
on
on you
that?
go, Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think clearly a lot of businesses interested in finding new customers at the moment, and that's likely to continue as people go back to work and discover that the marketplace will have, perhaps might have changed. So what people are buying, how people or businesses are buying, particularly if you think about our places. So people are buying more online, but conversely might be buying more locally at the same time. So there's lots of opportunities there. I understand businesses will be keen to do that, but not just finding more customers. But I think for some small businesses, who've really risen to the challenge over the last few weeks, a lot of them have seen a rapid growth in customers. And I think one thing that we're keen to see is how they keep those new customers, not just finding them, but keeping it. So how do they make that growth more sustainable? We know that a lot of small businesses, so according to our stats, I think 15% are using e-commerce either for the first time or more effectively. How do we help them use that e-commerce more effectively in their business? How they can make that rapid change in their business more sustainable, for example, and what kind of support are they going to need to help them do that, to keep on top of that new growth and make the whole business, I guess, more productive.
Yep, no, totally. And one of the questions, in fact, that we had was from a small shop in the Highlands that sells clothes made using local wool. They haven't as yet claimed any sort of funding, as usually their season wouldn't start until July and would run through to October. They were asking what their funding options are now. And well, I guess you need to look at what's still available on that. But certainly in terms of the business, what they maybe need to be thinking about now is going more online in terms of how they promote their business, how they sell to the customer, because it may be that the customer will not be coming to them. They'll need to be going to the customer. Like yourselves, we've seen many businesses that we're working with who have adapted to how they do business and trading online, selling online, takeaway, delivery options, all these kind of things. And I think it's important what you said there, though, Susan, about sustaining that beyond this situation. And I've really felt for the guy earlier. There was a social media post earlier, and it's a wee local dairy who's picked up lots of business on the back of this because he's been delivering to people's doorsteps, and it's been really tough for them. I mean, it's a tough business to be in, and has had a message from someone this morning: don't need you anymore because the supermarkets are back open again. I can go to the supermarket. And you kind of think, well, that's a bit of a kick in the teeth for someone who's gone the extra mile to help them out. And I guess I'm with you on this. I would be saying to folks, listen, buy local as much as you can. When you're out there desperately trying to get that latte that you really, really desperately have wanted for the last 3 months, think about your wee local coffee shop before you're jumping into the big chains. So, buy local. So we've On the back of that, we've developed a lot of online tutorials, webinars and guides to help businesses in this area, step-by-step guides to selling online, managing and working with online platforms. We touched on things like Zoom, using digital reach to get to your customers quickly online. So that's quite a number of different bits in there. Another question we had was, is there any advice you can offer to small businesses looking to diversify their product or service offering? What would they need to consider? Stephen, I'm going to come to you on that one first.
Okay,
You'll be thanking me for that one.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, rapidly trying to think. So we've got our Innovate Your Business sort of program, and that looks at innovation. How do you develop new products and so on? So I would encourage anybody to have a look at that. And Scottish Enterprise offer similar things. So go and have a look at that. I think then it's thinking about what is your product? Who wants to buy it? Why should they buy it? As we were talking about earlier, is about the story that you tell. So why should you buy milk from your local dairy, or your meat from your local butcher? And there's a bit there about telling the story about whether it's a premium or the extra value that you offer. Then once and there's advice and information we can give around that. So again, engage with that, and then once things have moved through that, there is a potential for funding support for development of new products and services, and that's very much that still remains in place. So there's that sort of business as usual element to what we can continue to do. The thing that I would say around that is very much that we are focusing our innovation support and indeed all of our support on responding to the COVID situation. So when you're coming forward with an application or a request, I would very much say, think about, is this helping you get back up and trading? Is this developing a new product to replace business that you've lost as a result of COVID? Is it responding to a need as a result of COVID? Or is it what we're sort of also seeing as well is that companies are looking for greater resilience in their supply chains, so they're looking to either increase the number of suppliers or to get more local suppliers. So are you responding to a need like that? And I think trying to frame whatever you're coming forward over the next 6 to 9 months as being responding to COVID will help.
Yeah. Okay. Susan, anything you want to add to that?
So I think Hugh, you were talking there about how small businesses have stepped in and filled gaps that have emerged over this crisis, and you would expect me to say this, of course, but we've always known how important small businesses are to provide services and jobs in our local communities. And as I said, what we want to do now is try and help businesses hang on to those customers as much as possible. So how do they make their offer stand out? So that might be things like they have moved more of their business to an online order and delivery, but they could possibly do it in a bit more of a slicker fashion, and so they might need some support to help them step that up a gear. So we're doing some online trading. How do I take it to the next level as a small business? And I suppose what I suspect a lot of smaller firms will be looking for is they'll be looking for these steps to be recognised by agencies like that Stephen represents, for example. They'll be looking to see, we've made these changes, we've gone so far, are people going to help us now take the next step? So we've wondered, for example, how would we think about what funding might be required to help any of that, even if it's match funding, for example, if the business puts in something and the public sector puts in something. But similarly, there's a lot of expertise exists amongst all our small businesses out there in Scotland, and we're not always that great at enabling peer-to-peer support within Scotland. So there might be an opportunity here to think about there's lots of micro businesses out there, some who need some help and others who offer that advice and expertise. So what can we do to help them find each other and take the productivity gains that we know are there to be had if we build on this growth and make it more sustainable?
Yep, that's very good. That's good. And I suppose wrapped around all of that in terms of that, trying to get new business or new customers, a good communication strategy is going to be key to engaging with and keeping your existing customers on board, as well as marketing your product and service to find new ones. Our Digital Boost programme that Business Gateway runs with support from the Scottish Government, there's a range of support on there to help business owners upskill and better utilise online channels. That whole programme has really been about building SMEs' capacity and capability to deal in the digital economy. And that's about channels that can allow you to communicate quickly, clearly, effectively with new and existing customers. And there's some new material we've produced, or new tutorials we've produced on that. As I touched on earlier, what to say to your customers and how to a guide on using digital to reach customers quickly. Getting the tone right in business communications, getting the tone is important. A difficult one to strike at the moment, obviously, because of the situation. And another important one, managing your business reputation online, which will be also important. In terms of finding more support, we've probably covered and mentioned a number of times now. There's the Business Gateway Coronavirus Business Support Hub. Federation of Small Businesses has a lot of material on their website. Highlands similarly have a lot of material there. The main one being obviously Find Business Support, which is that directory, as we said earlier, that pulls together all the available business support that's there. And you can find on there what's available so far in terms of the back to work guidance for each sector. And Stephen touched on it earlier, forestry's in there, construction, manufacturing and retail so far have all been covered. And that also covers the funding options. Somebody asked earlier what funding they might be able to get. The funding options are all there on that site as well. Now, I am very conscious that we have covered a lot of ground in the time available to us. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left. Susan, any last sort of thoughts that you want to share with the folks on the webinar?
Just a last thought for me is I know we've covered a lot, and I am aware that it could come across as quite confusing of the amount of things that businesses need to think about at the moment. So I suppose I would just say, don't panic. It is a lot of common sense. There is a lot of guidance and support out there to help you to do this. So you will find most of what you need through Find Business Support, particularly more coming over the next week or so, or through Business Gateway or through our own FSB COVID hub on our website. And particularly if you're an FSB member watching this, if you pick up the phone to us, we will point you in the right direction and we'll put you in touch with the right support. And if you're not a member, then think about coming and joining us.
There you go, sound advice. Stephen, any last words?
No, I would just echo that. I think there's so much information coming out at the moment, and things are changing so quickly that I would just encourage people to to keep in touch with the websites and keep looking. I think also I would be thinking just about the outcome, because there is so much advice out there. It's just thinking, what is it trying to achieve? So it's trying to keep people safe, it's trying to reduce the risk, and it's trying to to get things back up and going as quickly as possible. So think about that. And then I think the final thing I would say is just following on from our last bit of discussion around, look around and see who else is doing things, who's best practice, whether that's in a different sector, about whether it's online retail or it's creative industries or just whatever, or for the risk assessments with some of the stuff that manufacturing and that, just look at, see what others, what's going on elsewhere, and then think, okay, how do I apply this to my sector, and how do I demonstrate best practice? And then finally, what are really the simple things that you can do? I know locally, our farm shop didn't used to take contactless payments. Now we're taking contactless payments, and I've seen their business grow largely quite a simple thing, but COVID forced them to take that
Make
step.
that wee change.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks for that. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to draw a line at that. Thank you, everyone out there, for joining us on this of our first approach of a panel webinar. Thank you to both my colleagues, Susan and Stephen, for joining me this afternoon, and to the team behind us who've helped make this happen. I hope you found that useful. We look forward to seeing your feedback on it. And most importantly from me, look after yourselves, take care, and hopefully we'll talk again. Thank you very much.